Welcome back, everybody. This is now time for the third panel of the day, and nice to have you with us, and we're looking forward to another great conversation. It is also great to see so many of you dropping onto the gamification leaderboard. Thank you very much for taking part in that, and I also hope that you're enjoying making some connections as well. Now, our next conversation is going to focus on transforming the future of public procurement. In response to the pandemic, we saw public procurement reaching £357 billion, which, as we said earlier, is a significant increase on the previous year. So how does this affect public sector leaders and suppliers, given the new procurement regulations? And can we continue to improve public sector procurement and build back better? Well, to give us their insight into how leaders should navigate the challenges ahead, we have a fantastic panel lined up for you. And they are Lindsay Maguire, who's the Head of Procurement Reform from the Cabinet Office. Welcome to you, Lindsay. Also to Matthew Rees, who's the Director, Commercial Hub at the National Audit Office. We have Oluremi Aremu, who's the Head of Legal and Procurement Services at Coventry City Council. And we have Peter Schofield, who's the Head of Integrated Commissioning and Procurement at Manchester City Council. So welcome to you all, panel. Nice to have you with us. And don't forget, audience, if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A function, and we will get as many of them included as we can. So with all the other panels, we've sort of gone round and sort of said to everybody, each of our panelists, tell us a little bit about you and what you do. So can we do that first with you, please, panelists? Lindsay, can we start with you? We've given you a title, but what does your job involve?
Yeah, thank you, Samina. So I'm Lindsay Maguire, and I'm the Head of Procurement Reform. So we work in the commercial policy area of Cabinet Office, and it's essentially our role to implement and design and present the procurement reform bill.
Great, lovely to have you with us. Peter, same question to you.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Peter Schofield, yeah. I think the job title probably confuses more people than it informs, but the council put a big push into improving contract management across all services and brought commissioning and procurement together in order to do that. So I've been in the role for 3 years now, 2 years into lockdown, so some things have slipped and some things have accelerated. But overall, the mission is to improve the processes behind the procurements that people see.
Great,
and to get the best out of the contracts that come from that. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say we look forward to hearing more about how that happens in the discussion. Oluremi, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Oluremi Aremu. I'm the Head of Legal and Procurement Services over at Coventry City Council. My area primarily looks at, from a legal side, delivery of major projects across the city. Very similar to what Peter had mentioned, legal and procurement services have recently been joined together into one service, and that has expanded my role to also looking at contract management, establishing how we can use procurement flexibly to be able to achieve value for money and community benefits from a social value perspective, as well as contract management across the board. Thank you.
Great, and I bet it's been an interesting journey and still is. Again, we'll hear more about that, hopefully. And Matthew, last but not least, tell us a little bit more about your job, please.
Yes, hello everybody. So our role at the NEO is to report to Parliament on central government's activities, particularly on value for money side. So we publish about 60 reports a year, and certainly about 1 in 5 to 1 in 6 focus on procurement themes. So my role is to be a sort of central point of contact for all of our departmental facing teams, get involved in a lot of the studies that we do, lead them myself, or consult and support teams that are looking across the different departments. And obviously then we consolidate that into good practice guidance and audit frameworks, much of which is available in the public domain, and we can share links if people want to find out more. We can certainly point to a lot of reports and guidance.
Great, that's very helpful. Thank you, Matthew. So let's get into the discussion then, because we said this discussion is called Transforming the Future of Public Procurement. So Peter, simple question, what needs to change as a result of the new procurement laws, or the rules specifically?
Yeah, okay. In 35 minutes have I got?
Yes.
I think there was probably a view before the announcement that the rules were going to change, that the rules were okay. People were used to them and people were comfortable with them. But I think people have always said they prefer more freedom. And I think the new rules give us a really flexible process that we can follow. Well, in fact, they don't give us the process at all. They give us a massive amount of flexibility, provided we observe the sensible principles of ensuring that we maximize public benefit from our spend and that we're fair, equitable and transparent in the way we deal with suppliers. So we've all got, I guess, playbooks of our own in the office that we kind of follow with templates and so on. So we're going to have to rewrite a lot of those. But I think the biggest thing is getting people used to the fact that we can't any longer hide behind rules, and we can, as procurement professionals, it often happens, but also that we need to be able to be creative and think outside of the normal restrictions that or the previous restrictions that applied, and make sure that we focus on getting the best results from a procurement exercise and the subsequent management of a contract. So I think it's quite a significant change, but it'll take time for people to get used to this freedom.
Yeah, it certainly will. I'd like to extend that question to all of you. So, Oluremi, I know you're interested in telling us what you think about this, because this hugely affects what you do, doesn't it? You mentioned that in the introduction.
Yeah, yes, it does. And I totally agree with what's just been said, in the sense that, in the past, the rules have sometimes been, clear in terms of what was the intention, but when you applied it in terms of where local authorities moving into that new era of, trying to really deliver for the residents, felt a bit inhibitive. I think, yes, this new reform is moving towards that direction of a bit more freedom, in that sense. And for us, it's more around, some of the things that we're keeping an eye out for in Coventry at the moment is how we can maximize that public benefit element of the principle going forward, in making sure that, because we've got very clear strategic plans around economic growth and providing opportunities for both small, medium enterprises as well as, local residents. And it's how do we use our procurement activities to also bring some of those public benefits through, which I think, is part of the principles and objectives that's currently being set out in new reforms coming forward. So looking forward to it. But I think, as was mentioned before, it will require, us getting our heads around it, looking at what changes then need to be done to some of our documents, such as our constitution, around contract procedure rules, how we bring forward our procurement strategy, a revised version of that, and also looking to see, whilst the Act sets the broad principles of it, how the secondary regulations that come forward look to try and make sure that there's some sort of consistency and conformity about how, authorities can apply these new reforms. Okay.
And Lindsay, you were massively involved in all of this. I wonder what you see as being the single biggest step, really, for procurement teams when it comes to the reform.
Yes, definitely. And I would certainly echo what Peter and Oluremi said around bringing flexibility and also helping with public good and deliver on some of the really important social value goals. I think what we have tried to do in Cabinet Office is really balance public sector versus private sector interests. So we want to introduce a lot more flexibility for contracting authorities to design their own procurements. And for me, that is really going to be a significant step change, because it's going to put good commercial outcomes and procurement outcomes really at the heart of every procurement. So having that flexibility means that we should be able to be a lot more innovative. And what the new procedures will do is allow things which we struggled with previously under EU rules, like negotiation, but also funding bids and approaching IPR and tech in much more of a flexible way. And I fully appreciate that this is going to be a step change, and I'll come on to this a bit later, certainly, but we've made a commitment that we will make sure that there's lots of learning and development available. And part of this journey is going to be about sharing some of the best practice in terms of what works for procurement as well. So I see that as a huge opportunity for us, as procurement people, to really drive some change in how we manage the marketplace.
And was that a difficult process? I know you said you spoke initially about balancing the needs of public service, and I think the private companies you were talking about as well. So how hard was that to reach really the compromise on?
Yes, so it is a bit of a difficult process, but actually they're two sides of the same coin. So what will benefit contracting authorities? So if a contracting authority can be a bit more flexible in terms of how they're dealing with their tenders, and that's going to benefit businesses. And we've been really looking to make sure this reform works for new entrants to the marketplace and small businesses in particular, but also social enterprises and businesses that may previously have not even considered bidding for public tenders. So a lot of the structure around the reform, it's not necessarily the regulations, but we'll be rolling out centralized platforms, etc., which will make it a lot easier to work with the public sector. So I think what's good for the public sector is good also for private business.
Okay. Matthew, when it comes to government, is an investment in commercial skills and capability recognised properly as a driver of efficiency and better outcomes, or is it considered an expense and an overhead cost?
Yeah, I'm glad you've raised that question, and I think that's something that we are obviously very interested in good quality skills when we perform our audits, and it's a regular topic of conversation that we have with Lindsay's colleagues and the government commercial function. I mean, there's clearly a pressure on government to be efficient, but we also find in a lot of the reviews that we do that the skills and capabilities are not necessarily in the right place at the right time. So it's a real balancing act, and obviously with this legislative reform, there's then a new challenge for all of the people involved in this procurement to be up to speed with the changes that are happening. So I don't think government's quite got it right, and obviously our function is really to do these reviews, recommend improvements and changes where we don't see all of that capability in place. But I think long-term investment in the right skills, I think, is something that despite the sort of independent objective kind of reviews that we do, we definitely want to work closely with government to see that development and that investment, because it definitely pays off.
So you said you don't think government's quite got it right. Give us a little bit more, and then I'll let Lindsay come back on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're obviously looking across numerous departments, and I wasn't going to sort of stray off into many case studies. I think that they're on our website. I think it's quite evident from those reports that we'll find, we'll make recommendations around performance, and a lot of that comes down to were the team able to strike the right balance, run the right process. The reliance on things like direct awards, has been an issue through the pandemic, but you'd expect as business returns back to normal that you'd be into more of a competitive process, for example. So we obviously put out good practice guides, and we focus on the positive as well. And I think it's inevitable that we find shortcomings, we report to them Parliament. So I perhaps not in sort of for this sort of event picking out individual examples. I think it's just a question that I think we recognise we need the right skill sets, and to invest in people is really important for this new legislative cycle. Okay.
Well, I'm going to let Peter and Oluremi talk about how things are working now post-pandemic. But first, Lindsay, do you want to come back on anything that you've heard there for Matthew?
Yes, no, I mean, I would agree. So we've always been clear that any future reform, it's not just about the legislation and the policy, because we could do that, but it's more around how it's implemented and how we're embedding that into our existing systems, and that includes a commitment to drive capability, and it includes the learning and development that I've mentioned. I mean, what I will say is it's a good time for this reform, because actually we've been able to take into account a lot of those challenges we faced previously. So many of the NAO reports have informed how procurement happens and potential gaps in procurement, and also sort of big ticket issues such as the collapse of Carillion, for example. So when we've designed this, we've tried to really look at the root cause of some of the challenges and then put enablers into the reform. But I think Peter mentioned this right at the beginning, the legislation is actually only the first step. We don't we shouldn't be hiding behind the regulation, because this is an opportunity to actually look a bit broader than that and change the way that we do things. So yeah, I totally agree with what Matthew said there, and I think this is an opportunity for us all to kind of move forward with that in mind.
Okay, Peter, what lessons did the procurement team learn from the pandemic experience, and also, are you back to business as usual?
Well, business as usual, I think it didn't really stop in a lot of instances, but certainly we had to do some things very, very quickly that were kind of required urgently. And I think, the government very helpfully, Cabinet Office issued procurement policy notes that we could use as evidence to say to people there are freedoms within the existing regs that you can invoke in the event of an emergency. The problem we'd had in the past was that people were using the term emergency to cover something that was really poor practice. They'd just forgotten about something and they said it's an emergency, it's got to be done now. Well, when we had a genuine emergency, I think it became clear that there are paths that you can follow that are compliant with the rules. And they get the job done quickly. And I think people are now used to getting results more quickly from a procurement process. But there'll be a backlog of. One of the biggest things from the pandemic was we ended up extending a few contracts because it wasn't appropriate to go to market at a time when people were very uncertain about the future, and that could be anything from parking enforcement through to construction activity or anything in between, and in certain cases the social care and the PPE element of our procurement became extremely manic. So people cope with it. I think we're now, some of the things that are in the legislation or that were in the PPN that came out last year about the National Procurement Policy Statement and publishing pipelines, being more transparent about data and intentions and so on is it's going to be a bit of a burden to implement initially, but once it's up and running, I think it'll be a really good thing in relation to people being able to plan, look ahead, engage with the market early. And the previous rules didn't let us do that particularly well, and the new ones appear to allow quite a lot of freedom in that respect. Although obviously, once the details are available, we'll have a better view on that.
Okay, so you're hopeful, at least, and optimistic about how it will be implemented. Oluremi, do you feel that the contents and the coverage within the Green Paper address what is required to achieve the government's aim? I know you spoke about your own strategies and you were very clear about that, but we've all got this. There is an overarching aim, isn't there, for all the councils, and we're all heading towards being socially aware. We've got to bear in mind climate change. We've got to bear in mind carbon emissions, all that kind of thing. It all plays into it, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And I think on this occasion, I'll say that government is listening to some of the things that have been put through the consultation in terms of the future direction of procurement activity, because just taking on what Peter said, me putting my lawyer hat on, lawyers by tradition who have had involvement in procurement activities always look to try and bring things forward in the most compliant manner, taking advantages wherever possible within the regulations to structure deals and projects and all of that. And I do agree that the PPN note during the pandemic helped because it allowed for action to be taken very, very quickly without having to worry about whether there was a breach of procurement that could come back at a later stage to bite contracting authorities. Coming out of that, I think what we realized as part of reset and recovery was that the pandemic was a very, very difficult time for people and businesses. So we need something to try and start bringing some of that economic growth back into those sectors. And I think the government's direction of travel in trying to embed some of those principles into the bill, which will become the act, is flowing in the right direction. What would be more interesting for lawyers like myself dealing with this would be to see what the forthcoming regulations that sets out how you can do this without feeling like you're perhaps straying away from the principles would be quite interesting to see. But at the moment, from a government perspective, I think it's moving in the right direction. I agree. I don't think it's covered everything, but we still have a lot more regulations to come through. The part I'm interested to see is whether the target date with the 6 months go live is enough time for authorities to get their heads around all of this and be able to then put in processes that actually, gets them ready for the expiry of that 6 month go live date.
Okay, well, let's ask Lindsay. Lindsay, can you enlighten us on any of those questions that both Oluremi and of course Peter posed there about the target date, also the regulations, and how competitive it kind of leaves the whole process with suppliers in terms of them being able to understand and take on board these new regulations?
Yes, sure. So I'll take the last one first around the suppliers. So historically, we've always, across every sector, struggled a bit with kind of legal challenges, and this has led us down a road where sometimes our lawyers and ourselves as commercial people can be a little bit risk averse. And obviously, this is a new system. It's a completely new system. It's got new language. It's got new legislative process. So there will possibly be a few kind of bumps in the road as we figure it out. But our view is that if you make procurement more flexible, but also if you're more transparent about that procurement, so you're really clear around what it is you're doing, what parameters you're using, and what your processes are, then actually that should lead to a reduction in some of those challenges. Now, that's not going to be a switch and it turns off, because obviously we've got a marketplace that is very used to operating in that way. But I think what Peter said, I absolutely agree with, in terms of it is going to take a bit of time to implement this, because it is a big change. But actually, as it ramps up, once we get into a steady state, it should make everything an awful lot easier. And that's not just for ourselves, that's also for suppliers as well. So I'm reasonably confident that we will reach a point where actually this will be a lot better for us in terms of the legal stuff. In terms of the target date and in terms of the burden, we're going to, bluntly, we're going to be in the same position in terms of central government is going to be in the same position about getting ready for this. So local authorities and kind of public sector bodies who will be impacted will have some advocates around the timings. We are in a little bit of a bind because it's very dependent on what happens during Parliament. So if we had all of the control in the world, we could schedule our training, we could do all of that, but obviously we don't know exactly what the bill is going to look like when it comes out the other end of the parliamentary process. So it's very difficult to do it in parallel. There are some things which we think we're reasonably confident can't change, but you can't have an effective learning and development thing until you know what it is. So the 6 months is based around that. We do know that there will be a period of transition. So not all of your kind of contracts will move onto the new regime. So we're hoping that most organisations will have kind of a number of procurements in the pipeline which they think will be affected and can kind of focus on that, or also put in alternative things. But we will cross that bridge when we come to it and do loads of work around transition with with our stakeholders.
Okay. While we're talking about supplies, I just wondered if, Matthew, we could just put this question to you about competitive tendering and the benefits of publishing procurement pipelines, using open procedures to increase potential supplier interest, and losing place to direct awards and monopoly suppliers. I mean, how does that all work given these new regulations?
Well, yeah, I mean, we could spend the rest of the day discussing all of that. I mean, I think there's, it's really encouraging to see some of the reforms look at competition. I think obviously, the NAO doesn't get involved in this policy formation stage. We audit after policy's been renewed. But I was very interested to see some of the analysis at the back of the bill in terms of impact assessment on how competition drives better value. I think one of the challenges the UK has is the availability of data to really prove that. And some of the examples the bill relies on are international. I mean, from our perspective, certainly in my career, I've looked at everything from, the fully competitive areas around sort of, regulation into single source, applying regulations there. And I think government does certainly underscores the benefits of competition through its legislative plans, but whether it always gets that benefit, I think is something that we're very interested to keep coming back to. We're starting in our current work planning cycle to think about how we might come back to some of those themes. We put out the good practice guide last year, but there's very much a kind of theme there around market monitoring and some of the questions about whether the depth of the supply market is always available. So yeah, it's certainly a theme we're very interested in, and hope government's sort of progress with its own bill leads to obviously clarification about how it uses competition to the best effect.
Okay, and sort of related to this, Peter, I just wondered, should non-public sector organisations be set up, all set up frameworks really just to make profit?
Personal view, no, they shouldn't. I think it takes charging somebody for a place on a framework, whether they win any work or not, just doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
And it happens in a lot of walks of life. But frameworks certainly have their place, and central purchasing, the CCS frameworks are extremely useful for quite a lot of the things that we do. But quite often it's difficult to include localized requirements in terms of social value or in terms of engaging with SMEs. If you warm your SMEs up and then award a contract through a framework because it's quicker, then you've kind of wasted a bit of time talking to the SMEs in the first place and not done a particularly good job. So and I know the new regs have significant impact on frameworks, and some of the detail of which is yet to come through. I think if I could make a point here about, you mentioned emissions, climate change, doing things differently. There's a lot of funding being released at the moment from central government. Has been for a while now, and a lot of that's around levelling up, stimulating the construction industry to the extent where it's become pretty overheated. But that's not the government's fault. The issue, under the old rules, it was very, very difficult to meet some of the targets for completing a project in a compliant way. So, there are playbooks issued by the government commercial function, which are really good documents. The best way to do a procurement. But then when we're told, here's a funding opportunity in, you've got to put bids in by October. We'll give you a decision in December, and you've got to have the job completed by the following August. You find it very, very difficult to observe a proper playbook-related approach to that procurement, even to completing the application for the funding. So, and I know these things have to happen quickly, and we are in an emergency in relation to the climate as well. But we need, I think that probably demonstrates how much more useful a pipeline, how much easier things are to manage and plan when you have a pipeline. And Matthew mentioned data. I don't get me started about the lack of it and where we need to start.
Yeah, no, well, I can see Matthew smiling there, but Matthew, you've got plenty of this data, haven't you? I know you've put a couple of links out already.
Yeah, I mean, I've just sort of pointing to some of the reports. I mean, obviously we reference government guidance. That's great to see. Just on frameworks, I mean, I think as Peter said, they certainly have a role, and we obviously look at the role of Crown Commercial Service in that space. The report we just did into supply chain finance, so high.
It looks like we've sadly just lost. Oh no, we got Matthew back. There we go.
Sorry about that.
No, that's
a
fine.
lot of inbound emails coming for some reason. We've looked at frameworks where there's only one supplier. So it's certainly encouraging to see the legislation look to processes to admit additional suppliers to these frameworks during their life, because that then obviously keeps the flow of potential competition suppliers and a bit of scope, hopefully, for innovation there.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. I'm just looking at the time. We're not got long to go. So probably last question to you all. Lindsay, I do want to ask what you think procurement teams need to do now to prepare. Given everything you've said today, what's your advice?
Yes, absolutely. So I think I'm not going to recommend everyone read 122 pages of the procurement bill, but if you really want to, it will be a fun weekend. I can assure you. But we have published an awful lot of ancillary documents which are quite interesting. So if you are reading the bill now, online there are also a number of explanatory notes which sets out our intention behind how the bill will work, and sometimes they are a bit more useful to sort of see how it will work in practice. I think on a practical level, we've talked about implementation, we've talked about go live. We are going to be having some dedicated learning and development, as I've mentioned, so it'd be good if contracting authorities could start considering who needs that learning and development, so who is actually going to be doing these procurements. Think about your your organizational capacity. Think about how procurement is in the organization, but also, and I think we mentioned this and Peter mentioned this about pipelines, is what's coming up over the next 2 years that might actually be part of the new regime, and are there decisions that you could take now around potentially extending contracts so that they will fall into the new regime to benefit from that flexibility. So we're going to be doing quite a lot of stakeholder engagement over the next few months. We've got loads of events like this one and a load of dedicated webinars. So feel free to reach out and raise any questions via any forums or our kind of dedicated email address as well as we go forward.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lindsay, for that. Oluremi, what are you looking forward to, certainly within the next 6 months and indeed the next couple of years, in terms of a successful implementation of these new regulations?
Well, yeah, I think it's very much some of the things Lindsay has said, which is, looking at what the guidance notes and explanatory notes coming through are. One of the things that we are looking to bring in very, very quickly is a training for all commercial lawyers as well as procurement team around the new introduction under the Health and Social Care Act 2022, which has also brought forward some reform into the public health side of contracting and making sure that we understand how we can start to take advantage of that now. So other than that, really, it's, looking at the pipeline, as Lindsay has said, of what contracts do we think we have coming down the line when we think we'll be under the new regime. It's an interesting one around the ability to extend some of the contracts we've got, which maybe perhaps are going to end whilst they're still under this current regime and before the new regime, in a way that complies with the modification elements of the current 2015 procurement regs. But it's something we're going to have to look into as well, because what we don't want to be doing is putting procurements in towards the start date of a new procurement regime where we could have got better outcomes for it under the new regime. So it's looking at all of those. It's a watching brief as it progresses through the House, as the notes come through, as the regulations come through, and what we as an authority would like to see as being the primary objectives that we want to achieve out of procurement and how best we can get those outcomes.
Yeah, no, we hear what you're saying about that tricky period and how you're going to navigate that. So yeah, we understand what you're saying. Peter, Manchester City Council, what are you hoping for the next 6 months, next couple of years? Where would success indicate those regulations have worked?
Yeah, well, I think it's already been mentioned that probably procurement professionals and legal teams will be, we've got plenty of time to get up to speed with the new regs. It's whether the markets that we operate in, that we engage with, are going to understand the new regs. I think one potential issue is that if people have so much flexibility, we'll end up with every supplier getting approached in a different way by every authority, and that could give them some issues, and therefore possibly stifle their ability to make a meaningful response to an invitation to tender. I think that just in the next 6 months, the council is currently looking at setting up 1 or 2 entities that will be kind of part owned by the council, that are being set up to do things differently, and be more commercial. And there are some tweaks to the definition of a contracting authority at the very beginning of the bill, which we're going to have to be really careful about, because it might be that some of the entities we set up that wouldn't have to be a contracting authority may be caught as a contracting authority under the new regs. So, there are nuances like that that we need to be careful about. But overall, I am probably I was going to say famous, but people that know me probably see me as an optimist. So I am optimistic about the future anyway. I think it is looking good.
Great, thank you for that. Matthew, I'm going to leave the last word to you because you have the most information to hand, so to speak. What would you recommend anybody really who's involved in the procurement process really needs to be focusing on at this point in time to meet those new regulations?
Well, I mean, I think perhaps the broader context for all of our work is that we're looking at that in our report. So clearly the procurement process, either current rules or future rules, is important to get right. But most of our reports take, the context of what is the authority trying to achieve, what outcomes, and how are they going about it. And I think that's just a recurring theme across all of our work, is that we see obviously a lot of public servants trying to get the best outcomes for citizens and communities. It's not easy, and that's obviously our role to come and report on it independently. So I think the main thing is that taking this new change in stride shouldn't ultimately affect the core objectives of what everybody's trying to achieve, but clearly with governments with the policy intentions, it'll be improving some of the processes.
Great. Okay, we are going to leave it there because we've run out of time. Lindsay, Oluremi, Matthew, and of course Peter, thank you all for joining us this afternoon, early afternoon now. And it's been really great to hear your thoughts, and we wish you all the best with the future. Thank you very much for joining us today for the panel discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
And thank you for listening. Bye to our panelists. Lovely, fantastic and engaging discussion. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will share some of the information that was shared with us throughout that discussion, and indeed any of the discussions on our various platforms as well. I also hope you continue to score points with the gamification tool, and don't forget we've got prizes for our winners by the end of the day, and that good deed that you could do perhaps by giving certainly having your winnings donated in the form of trees to our More Trees charity. So it's time now for a break. We're going to have a lunch break, and hopefully we'll see you back here at 2 o'clock. Enjoy that, and we'll see you soon. For now, bye-bye.
Yeah.